Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to be talking about the LGBTQIA plus community, especially in terms of our gifted students. It is chapter 21 in the textbook, and you are free to follow along. So the first thing I want to talk about is the main theme of the chapter. And we're going to open up with a quote that the textbook uses from Adrienne Rich. And so it says, "When those who have power to name and to socially construct reality choose not to see you or hear you, when someone with the authority of a teacher, say, describes the world and you are not in it, there is a moment of psychic disequilibrium, as if you looked into a mirror and saw nothing. Yet you know you exist and others like you, that this is a game of mirrors. It takes some strength of soul, and not just individual strength, but collective understanding to resist this void, this non-being into which you are thrust, and to stand up, demanding to be seen and heard." So the main theme of this chapter are students who are gifted and identify in the LGBTQIA plus community are essentially looking into a mirror and seeing nothing reflected back to them. It's really as if no one sees who they truly are and are ignoring their true identities. So the chapter brings up 9 different issues that comprise kind of how this community can have a lot of different issues. We're going to break each one of them down. So it's the invisible acronym. So the first one is identity issues. And gender identity in the textbook was defined as a person's sense of what genders, if any, with which they identify. So this is the internal sense, not to be confused with the external expression of how the student is presenting. So many have mixed feelings about identifying as LGBTQIA+. They're unsure of how their identity will be perceived, especially if their family has had a negative reaction. They don't necessarily want to be associated with a marginalized group, or if the people that they know that are a part of this community, they have negative experiences with them, they don't necessarily want to associate. So feelings about identifying as LGBTQIA+, like how does this being identified as gifted also impact their overall psyche? And so there's 2 quotes that I pulled out that they highlighted in this section as well. So the first one is kind of the more negative perspective, which is the gifted identity started the severe self-hate and issues that I have with myself, and the gay identity just added on to it. The more positive side of this is that a student said, "The gifted part of me caused me to be inquisitive and ask questions and helped me define who I was. And then it helped me decide whether I wanted a label or not." The next part inside of our invisible acronym is no reflection. So they start this section out by saying that 66% of LGBTQIA+ students in the US were not exposed to any representation of LGBTQIA+ people, history, or events, and 17% were taught negative representations. So they're underrepresented or there's negative exposure, and it's reinforcing these heteronormative ideas by either through negative or lack of representation. And one of the quotes I pulled out is that it says, "Unconsciously reinforce heterosexuality and erase the existence of any alternative identities." The next letter we have is violence, harassment, and/or discrimination. So violence, harassment, and/or discrimination against LGBTQ+ teens occur approximately twice the rate that they occur against non-LGBTQ+ youth. So Southern Poverty Law Center reported that the number of anti-LGBTQ hate groups soared to 43% in 2019, which caused additional harassment outside of teacher site. So that would be hallways, bathrooms, off-campus events, and during the commute to and from school. So students may experience violence and harassment due to prejudicial attitudes towards gender identity and expression, often lead to anxiety focusing on reading the gender of others, which leads to this gender policing. So there's different layers to consider when we're thinking about this section, is that how are students impacted by violence, harassment, and discrimination when they're gifted and identify within the LGBTQ+ community, when they're gifted, identify in the LGBTQ+ community, and they're a person of color. So further into the chapter, they talk about 86% of LGBTQ+ students experience harassment or assault, and 41% chose not to report for fear of retaliation and their physical safety. So the next one is invisibility. And this is when there's assumptions of heterosexuality and gender, and it can create discomfort. And it's still a belief that LGBTQ plus students are not accepted, as if they do not exist or do not have the right to exist. So this is where we talk about the continuum of visibility, and that's how students decide how they want to fit in. So when they was talking about gifted students, it's if they want to hide or express. So they would either have lack of achievement, or they're dressing differently, they're trying to act differently than their peers to kind of move more towards showing, I'm here. This is doubly hard for LGBTQ plus students because they must choose whether to express and embrace or hide and deny. And it's this burden of being twice different, which can cause this isolation, anxiety, and depression. Some students may use academic and athletic achievement to help cope, but others are engaging in self-destructive and risky behaviors to fit in. So towards the end of the section, they talk about different self-preservation strategies, such as hiding, conforming, using alternate personalities at home, having a private personality, external personality, and then suppressing different behaviors that don't conform with gender roles that they the gender that they were born with. They're trying to follow those rules instead of doing what they truly want to do or identify as. So towards the end of the section, they talk about a student and his experiences with being gifted, LGBTQ plus, and a person of color. And he says, suppressing different points of my identities became critical to my success in school, perhaps especially by influencing my interactions with peers. Next, we have sensitivity. So gifted students can be known to have overexcitabilities, and for LGBTQ plus students, these can be even more intense due to bullying, alienation, and isolation. So it leads to more hiding of their true self, which can lead to internal turmoil. And in the textbook, they even say internal domestic violence, because revealing the true self is also revealing their true ultra-sensitive and ultra-vulnerable self. So they are trying to protect and hide that piece of themselves, which protecting themselves serves to sustain the sense of being alone. And the issue with this is that suicidal ideation, especially by transgender and gender nonconforming individuals, can be predicted by sexual victimization, sexual harassment victimization, bias-based victimization, and problematic drug use. So students feel like they have to truly hide them internal selves leads to a lot of internal battle, and that leads to a lot of mental health concerns. So inclusive language issues, a lack of inclusive language also contributes to a dominant ideology of heteronormativity and cisnormativity within schools. Teachers and staff can contribute to this issue through misgendering and not using affirmed names. In addition, in school communications, using language like mother, father instead of parent and guardian, and even using pronouns that do not match the students' pronouns that they have decided to use. So McGuire et al. Found that trans and gender nonconforming youth were more likely to hear negative comments by school personnel than to hear them confront other students for making negative comments. So behavior and interest differences. Many gifted children tend to be androgynous in both characteristics and interests, so they don't necessarily adhere to traditional binary male-female roles. A lot of them reject binary pronouns. So when children are first born into their gender, their parents enforce this heteronormativity, putting, girls in girly clothes, doing girly activities, tea parties, things like that, boys into boy clothes, monster trucks, all that kind of thing. And it's enforced by the community. So when they reach school, that's being further enforced, which can enforce the heteronormativity, and it could stifle creativity and achievement. So it's this double standard that girls recently have been more supported in pursuing non-traditional domains and roles, but boys are not being supported. So that really does need to change. There's a lack of role models. So psychological distress caused by trauma or depression, which is caused by isolation, fear, unhealthy perfectionism. Perfectionism is a deep-rooted fear of not being accepted as who they truly are, while isolationism and feeling out of place can be a consequence of a lack of positive LGBTQ plus role models. So this lack of role models causes feelings of isolation. And then there's also these heterosexual assumptions all throughout the school environment, which can lead to depression. The other big issue with this is that students are lacking these role models because employees who maybe identify in the LGBTQ plus community are not necessarily protected if they decide to make their identity and sexuality known in the workplace, 27 states have no protection. And then on top of that, LGBTQ plus teachers fear being discriminated against if parents desire to protect their children from their influence. So this all just leads to students not feeling like they are being seen. The final one is the empowerment quandary. And this is all about self-advocacy, which in the textbook, they quote that self-advocacy is the process of recognizing and meeting the needs specific to your own learning ability without compromising the dignity of yourself or others. And it's a really critical element of growth mindset that leads to student empowerment. But any efforts to empower LGBTQ plus students and encourage them to self-advocate could become difficult to implement and may come across as insincere. And this is even a bigger issue in our students who are neurologically different and are also gifted LGBTQ plus. So this is really a huge issue for students who feel like they cannot speak up for themselves. So we talked about invisible, but now we want to make students feel visible. So these are the different solutions that we have for helping our students feel more empowered. And this is table 21.1 of different strategies you can use within your school. And so for violence, it's protecting students. So I just pulled 3 of the solutions out. So, posting a safe place or a rainbow flag or a equality symbol somewhere that's very frequently passed by your students, like classrooms, in your window, in the door, whatever makes sense, but making sure it's known. Going and seeking financial support for LGBTQ plus youth organizations, resources, and making sure you're publicly praising those who actively foster inclusive environments to kind of help your community start to build those more and more people speaking up and talking and supporting LGBTQ plus students and our gifted LGBTQ plus students. For invisibility, it's dispelling these heterosexuality assumptions. So asking students to share their pronouns if they feel comfortable, share your own and have all guests who enter the classroom share theirs, making sure there's professional development on gifted students, LGBTQ plus students, and gifted LGBTQ plus students. And then when school dance is coming up, making sure to advertise it's for all students, all couples, and that we're using inclusive language. For sensitivities, making sure there's interprofessional collaboration with counselors, social workers, people who are knowledgeable, and then making sure there's inclusion in curriculum. So, including some education on overexcitabilities to help students better understand each other, and having a comfortable classroom with sensory spaces, different seating arrangements, different types of seats to help these students as well. Then we're going to do inclusive language and curriculum. So positive representations of LGBTQ plus in history, utilizing gender neutral parent guardian terms of communicating with students and families, and then making small changes such as using gender neutral pronouns in math problems, same-sex couples when you're practicing foreign languages, and then putting up posters around the room that show LGBTQ plus individuals and support gender variance and nonconformity. Behaviors and interests allow gender variance, so allowing non-traditional gender roles in the curriculum, allow for students to pursue what they're interested in, no matter the gender role, and then providing opportunities for students to engage with individuals who push against gender stereotypes, whether that's through guest speakers, mentors, individual mentors, things like that. So this lack of role models revealing reflections in the mirror, so connecting with LGBTQ plus advocates, having the students do research projects or creating a curriculum focused on gender identity and or sexual orientation of eminent gifted individuals, and then making sure to provide opportunities for students to engage with LGBTQ role models through guest speakers, posters, things like that. So then we have empowerment and support strategies, which is allowing students the opportunity to express their gender identities and pronouns if they feel comfortable doing so, observing the day of silence, and then also having extracurricular organizations such as Gay Straight Alliance. So I just put some resources on here. So the top one is the LGBTQ Center here at Purdue, and that is in the Hicks Undergraduate Library, and I have their phone number and their email there. And then I also put Purdue University CAPS on here, their location. They have a crisis line as well. So it's their phone number, but you just press 1 and that's accessible 24 hours. The National Suicide Hotline, the Mental Health America Crisis Center in Lafayette, Indiana, that's their phone number. And then also I included this link from the CDC because there's some really great resources on there, especially about how to implement education about LGBTQ plus individuals and history into your curriculum. So something to look at. And then this is the textbook that I used, our handy dandy introduction to gifted education. So thank you so much for following along, and I'm looking forward to reading everyone's reflections. Thank you.